Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel, my blog, wherever you happen to be watching this video. Welcome back. It's video 2. As you can see, I've moved to a new location. Uh, we're here to talk about the second part, or the next thing we're here to talk about. So in the last video, we discussed the different parts of our Visual Studio interface, right? We talked about the IDE, where the code gets written. We talked about the Solution Explorer. We talked about the IDE right here. We talked about the Solution Explorer, where your files are stored. We talked about the output, where your results are displayed. Your results can also be displayed right here underneath the Test Explorer, where you actually run the tests. So, let's talk about the Solution Explorer. So today, our job is to dive more in depth into Solution Explorer and understand exactly what the Solution Explorer is, how I've arranged it, what all the files inside of it mean, and things like that. So let's start with the most basic version of Solution Explorer with nothing opened. So this is a Solution Explorer, right? Our project is called the Martial Automation Project, okay, and it has 2 projects inside of it. Now I'll explain those 2 projects in a second. The first project is the Selenium Automation Project. The Selenium Automation Project contains 3 things. It contains Selenium. Selenium is essentially a set of rules, or a set of it's code created by the team that created Selenium, that actually allows Visual Studio to interact with your browser, right? It's stored in Selenium Automation Project under the references section. So in the references are where Selenium is stored. This includes all of Selenium's rules and syntax and things like that, because Selenium has its own rules. This would be right here under WebDriver support. Anything else in the references section is related to Visual Studio itself, with the Visual Studio syntax, including like date, time, things like that into your code, and just different things like that. This other project is called the UI Automation Helper Project. This one is a little bit more complex, but its job is to basically be a backup, or not a backup, but it's to support the Selenium Automation Project. The Selenium Automation Project, like I said, contains Selenium itself. It also contains all your tests, which is in test scripts right here, and it contains the code that will start or open the browser and will tear it down when the test is done. The UI Automation Helper methods file contains the drivers that will power your test. This includes the drivers for the different browsers, and it also includes the helper files, which includes a file called the UI Automation Helper file, which has a bunch of methods and some classes that will make writing tests easier. The file is customized based on the application, but we'll get more into that later. To add anything to your Solution Explorer, you'll right click the Martial Automation Project at the top here. So say I wanted to add an image or an Excel spreadsheet for some reason, any type of file I want to add, I right click and I hit add. I go to add the drop down, and then I can add another project. If for some reason I would need to add another project, I can add a new item, or I can add an existing item. An existing item would allow me to add something that already exists on my computer, like a Excel spreadsheet, an image, things like that. A new item will allow me to create a new item, like an XML file, an HTML page, JavaScript file, things like that, that I'm going to write from scratch here in the that I would use the IDE to actually write. What are we talking about next? Okay, so we talked about adding files to the entire project as a whole. Now let's talk about the folders that I have here. So a folder is just like what a folder is in real life. A folder is something that contains a bunch of files in an organized fashion and manner. Now, all my tests are stored in this test scripts folder, right? My base class contains the things that help me set up and start my test. The drivers folder contains all the drivers. The helper files contains all the helper files, right? The reason it's organized in this fashion is that if it was not organized in if the files were not in folders, they would literally be all over the place because Visual Studios would arrange everything in an alphabetical format or in the order that I added them, which isn't good because things that start with different letters that are supposed to be next to each other would be all over the place. It would just be very unorganized. So we need to make sure that we have folders. If we have any files or a list of files, I only have two Excel spreadsheets. One's a CSV and one's an actual Excel spreadsheet, which is why I don't have them in the folder. But say I had 6 or 7 Excel spreadsheets for different things that I had in there, that I would also put those in the folder just so that everything is organized and it's easier to access anything when I need to find it. Now let's talk about adding tests. If I wanted to add a test to this project, right, I would go to test scripts where my tests are stored. I would right click the test scripts folder. I would go to add. Then I would go to new item. You could click unit test right here, but we'll get to that in a minute. But I would go to new item. Then I would go down here to test, basic unit test. I would use that one, the basic unit tests. Now, while we did talk about unit testing earlier, and this is technically the same. This is a file that would be used for the same type of unit testing. It does not mean that we're creating unit tests. We're creating UI automation tests. It's just that the format that the test will be written in is similar to the unit test format. This is just a base, a very loose skeleton, you could say, which can be modified to fit our UI automation needs. That's why it says unit test, basic unit test, and things like that. So unit test 1, I would change the name to whatever I want the test to be called. Then I would hit add, and then it would add a blank test file. I'll show you guys right now, actually. Okay, so it added a blank test called unit test 1. There's not very much in it, and the things that are in here I'll explain later. But essentially, we now know how to add tests in case we want to add new tests. Let me delete this real quick. I don't want this solution to become messy. Yes, I want to delete it. Okay. The next thing we're talking about is the app config file. This is very important. If you don't get anything else from this video, this needs to be understood. Well, I would appreciate it if you were listening. The app config file contains configuration that allows you to that modifies how the test is run. Now, this solution will be available to you guys soon. I mean, it depends on the time frame of when you're watching this video. A link should be in the description at one point in time. If it's not, well, once you get it, essentially, right? The app config file should be the first thing you modify. Why? Because right now it's pointing to specific things in relation to my system. For example, the Chrome WebDriver, which runs the test if you're using Chrome, the app config file needs to have a value that tells the code exactly where the test will be found. I mean, where the driver will be found. Right now, it's pointing to a location on my system, right? It says C users, Jesse desktop, because I have the entire project on my desktop. If you were to try and run any test right now, without modifying this file, they would fail because they would tell you that the driver cannot be found, yada, 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 and things like that. Now, another thing that the app config file is for is for changing the browser that you want to use to run your test. So right now, it's set to Chrome. How do I know this? It's the key driver right here has a value of Chrome. If I wanted to run the test in another browser, I could change the value of the key driver to, for example, IE for Internet Explorer, Firefox for Firefox, Safari for Safari, Opera for Opera. It just depends on what browser you're using. I mainly use Chrome because, in my opinion, Chrome is the most efficient browser. But different applications may require you to use different browsers and things like that. Some applications work better in Firefox, yada, 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 etc., etc. So, got that. Now, I want to talk about a very special browser, actually. We'll get to that when we talk about drivers. But we'll talk mostly about the app config file. It also holds the username and password that we would be using for the application that we're testing. So right here, the key is Marshall user, Marshall password has the values right here. So when I'm running the test, make sure to have those available and on the ready. Let's talk about the drivers now. So we looked at the app config file. So No, I don't want to save the changes. That's great, actually, that asked me that first, because I don't want to mess anything up. But this is the drivers folder right here. It's part of the UI Automation Helper project, like I said earlier. Now, I don't have drivers for Firefox. They can be downloaded online. I just haven't bothered to put them in this project because I don't use Firefox to run these tests. But my Chrome driver, you guys can see, is located right here. My Internet Explorer driver is here. And my Phantom.js driver is also here. Now, let me talk about Phantom.js for a second because it's really important. When tests are run with any other browser, right, Chrome, IE, or whatever, when you start the test, you can usually see the test being run. You can see it typing, you can see it open the browser, type the username, type the password, all that good stuff. I think I showed it in the last video. When Phantom.js is used, Phantom.js is a headless browser. So essentially, when the test is run, there is no browser popping up that displays the test happening. This is more efficient because instead of loading a bunch of images and things like that, when the test actually runs, it just looks through the test. Looks through the application itself, looks through the code that constructs the HTML for the application, and finds and uses that to interact with the application. I'll talk more about that later when we're talking about how Selenium actually interacts with the application. But for now, all you need to understand is that Phantom.js is a great tool for headless testing. To verify that Phantom.js do nothing, there are functions like taking screenshots, storing values, and things like that that you can use to make sure that Phantom.js is doing its job. But essentially, the end goal is to be using Phantom.js. If you have 1,000 tests, you do not want Chrome to open close and open and close for every single test. It's ridiculous. It takes a really long time. So we talked about our drivers. Let's talk about our test files. So we talked about the tests essentially already, but in test scripts is where our test files are stored, right? So we have 4 tests in here. You can see by the 4 C# files, you can see the little C# icon, the 4 C# icons that exist in this test scripts folder. Now, the naming of the test is very important. It's simply because when somebody else comes in to look at them, they want to be able to immediately understand what this test is going to test. When I open each of these files, each file respond, as you can see, the IDE, as I click them in Solution Explorer, the file is actually also open in the IDE for me to modify. If I were to add a new test, I think I showed that to you guys already. So this is just verifying that you guys understand this is where the tests are stored. When the solution gets built, actually all these individual tests get turned into tests in the Test Explorer over here on the left side. So I just want to make sure that you guys got that. It's pretty important and things like that. So the last thing I want to talk about is the helper files. So the helper files are part of the UI Automation Helper project, right? Right now there are 2 files in here: the log4net helper, which I'll talk about later, and the UI Automation Helper methods, right? The UI Automation Helper methods is very important because it doesn't need to get modified specifically, but it does need to get modified if you're testing the same application that I'm testing right now. But if you were to test a different application, there are some things that will need to change. Specifically, login, logout methods, clicking methods that are specific to the types of buttons that exist on the application I'm testing. It's basically designed to make the testing process easier, right? So they're kind of shortcuts that are created within the UI Automation Helper methods file. It's kind of long. I mean, it's not incredibly long. It just has a couple functions here and there to kind of, help us make our tests more efficient. Honestly, the packages config file just has the different packages, Selenium being installed, log4net. It has to do with running Phantom.js, using Phantom.js to run your tests. That's also what the log4net helper file is about, but I'll talk about that at a later time. I think for now we've covered everything I wanted to talk about in this video. If you liked anything I had to say, or if you have any questions, please feel free to leave comments below. I believe that's all for today. Thank you guys very much. Have a great day. If there's anything you didn't understand, you can always rewatch the video. You can visit my earlier videos if there's something you didn't understand from the last time we spoke. There'll be more videos out soon, so just take care, guys. Have a great one. See you later.